Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be filming my November wrap-up. And November was kind of just I don't know, it was a mediocre month for me, if I'm being honest, reading-wise and just life in general-wise. I just had a really weird reading month, you know, because I read a lot of mediocre romance this month. I read a lot of really terrible nonfiction. I mean, on the bright side, I have discovered a new all-time favorite manga series, but also I have a really unpopular opinion on one of the most popular books of the year. So yeah, November's just been wild. I did have a thriller reading vlog that I did earlier this month that I will have linked down below. I also did a Patreon exclusive reading vlog this month for It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover. And that video was like 45 minutes long, and it included not just me reading It Starts With Us and kind of like bawling my eyes out over this book, but it also included me putting on these fake temporary tattoos, and we played Colleen Hoover bingo. And then I also was able to get Taylor Swift tickets, and I included all of the process with like the Ticketmaster fiasco that happened this month. But otherwise, like every other vlog that I was trying to work on this month got scrapped, and it was very frustrating. Like November was just not my month. If you didn't know, at the beginning of November, I just moved into this new apartment, which is fantastic. Like moving was so great, but it was also so stressful, and it took such a toll on my body that I got really sick the first week that we lived here, and I thought it was COVID, but it wasn't, but it felt like pretty awful. Like I was sick for a good like 10 days, you know? And then I had like a solid week and a half where I felt great, and then for this like last like 10 days of November, I've just been stressing really bad because I have my wisdom tooth surgery at the end of November, which by the time you're seeing this, that will have already happened. But you know, it's just been a really difficult time for me in November. I've just had a lot of anxiety about a lot of things like moving and getting surgery. Like there's just been a lot of changes going on for me, and so that definitely affected my reading month, because I definitely wanted to do, you know, the reading classic horror books video this month. That didn't end up happening because I could not freaking concentrate for the life of me, and then I was gonna end up replacing it with another vlog idea, which also got scrapped because I couldn't concentrate, so sorry about that. I'm really hoping that December is going to be a much better month for me, just overall, because once I get this surgery, I'll have a lot less to stress about, you know, and hopefully I can just get my reading back on track. But anyways, for the month of November, I read 18 books, which included 6 mangas and then 12 regular novels. So I figured I would start with the mangas because honestly, like most of the mangas were the highlight of my month this month. This month I started with reading Blood on the Tracks Volume 2 and Volume 3. I already had to return Volume 2 to the library, but this is Volume 3 as well. And this series is so freaking fascinating. This series is kind of like Bates Motel, if I had to compare it to anything, where we're following this mother and this son who just have this very strange and unique bond that really pushes the limits of a mother-son bond. Like it almost feels kind of like romantic in like a gross way, and just ugh. And this is a horror and thriller manga series, and I feel like when you first start this series, you might not fully grasp like what about it is so like horrific until the end of Volume 1, and then you're gonna be like, oh, what the fuck? And then Volumes 2 and 3 honestly are just as chaotic and wild to me, and this series just keeps getting more and more intense. I just feel so bad for this kid, you know, like this little boy. Like Jesus Christ, like this series is really hard to read, but it's so fascinating. It's like a train wreck that I can't look away from, and both Volume 2 and Volume 3 were both 4 stars for me. I'm really enjoying the series and I can't wait to read more. And then I ended up reading Anti-Romance Volume 1. This is one that I was so incredibly excited to read because this one is about these two guys who they've been roommates for like 7 years, and I think they knew each other growing up as well. And this is about like a roommates to lovers type of romance, and this was so anticipated by me because this copy is just absolutely stunning. There's a lot of really beautiful like glossy photos in the back too, and just I don't know, I was so excited for this. And unfortunately, I ended up giving this one 2 stars. Like this was just not really what I was expecting at all. I feel like the writing in this book is kind of confusing. Like it's kind of hard to even follow what's happening in the story just because of the way that it's written. And not only that, but like I didn't really feel any chemistry between these two, which sucks because I just really wanted to love this. And it's like not only did I not really buy into their romance, I could barely even buy into their friendship. Like these two just don't even really talk to each other. It's almost like they don't even like each other, and it was just very strange and like not really what I was wanting. It just sucks, you know, because I feel like this one had so much potential because I just love and adore the drawings in this one. Like this has some of the most like beautiful art I've ever seen in a manga, and so I was like really highly anticipating this one, and I'm really bummed that I didn't enjoy it very much. The next thing that I read was Spy Family Volume 5. This is another, you know, volume in one of my favorite manga series, Spy Family. It's so freaking cute. And in this series, we're following this spy named Twilight, who he has to get like a fake wife and a fake family in order to do this like investigation into this private school. And so that's basically what this whole series is about. And this one is just so freaking cute. This one I ended up giving 4 stars though, because there are some scenes with, you know, the wife, her brother is just like really obnoxious. He's the one on the cover here, and I'm not the biggest fan of his character, and I find him to be really annoying, and there was a lot of him in this volume, which I didn't love. But oh my gosh, their daughter Anya is like one of my favorite characters in manga. Like, I just love her so fucking much. And this story had so many cute moments with her. Like, I was tabbing so many of the cute Anya moments because I was like, oh my god, she's precious. And then I did read 2 more volumes from what is possibly my favorite manga series now, which is Sweat and Soap. I read volumes 2 and 3 this month. I actually read the first volume last month in October, and I loved it so much that I bought all 11 volumes in the series. And so I read 2 and 3 this month, and this series is just genuinely so cute. It's so wholesome, which is something that you might not expect, because I think the premise of it sounds kind of like strange when you initially hear it. You're like, wait, what? Because in this manga series, we're following these 2 people who work for this like soap scent company, right? And he is like the CEO dude who like smells and discovers new scents, and she's always been really insecure about the way that she smells. Like, she's always been bullied about the way that she smells growing up, so she's like really insecure about it, and she has kind of a problem with like sweating quite a bit. Smells her, and he like instantly just like wants to be around her, like needs to know what that scent is, and he's like inspired by the way that she smells. I know it sounds so weird when I like try to describe it to you, and honestly the first volume, when you're reading it, you're like, wait, what? Like, this is kind of strange. But oh my god, by the end of volume 1, like, they are just so fucking cute. They are so wholesome. They remind me so much of like Kath and Levi, I think, which is why I love it so much. You know, Kath and Levi from Fangirl, they're like one of my favorite couples, and they just give me major Kath and Levi vibes. Like, look at him with his like scruffy hair, and her with her little glasses and her bangs, and like she's super awkward. Like, is she not so Kath? So yeah, these are both 5 stars for me. I absolutely love these. I also love her brother in this series. Oh my gosh, look at this guy. This is her younger brother. And like, he's so freaking adorable, and he's so protective of her, and it's like so freaking cute. And I honestly wish this author would do like a spin-off series with the brother, because I like his character so much. But yeah, these books are so good. Like, some of my favorite manga that I've ever read. I'm obsessed. I can't wait to finish the rest of these books after my surgery. Like, I'm just gonna lay in bed and like binge the rest of them because they make me so happy. All right, so now on to the full-length novels that I read this month. I started off this month with a lot of mediocre romance, and you know, I actually did plan to do a video at the start of this month that was going to be like reading 5 romance books in 5 days or something like that, but then I got really sick, and so it didn't happen. But I think it was probably for the best that it didn't happen, because I was not enjoying anything that I was reading, really. I mean, everything was like mediocre. It was all like 3 stars, so like I don't think it would have made for the most entertaining video anyways. The first thing that I read was A Cosmic Kind of Love by Samantha Young. This is one that I was highly anticipating because, hello, space vibes. And so in this story, we're following this wedding event planner, and she gets all of this like inspiration sent to her from this girl that she's doing the wedding for, and she sees all these videos of this guy who works for NASA who's an astronaut, and she like watches all of his personal videos. She starts sending like video messages and video diaries back to his email that's like a deactivated NASA email, so she doesn't think anyone will be able to see them, but of course he's seeing them. And this book was cute. It just wasn't exactly what I was expecting. Like, I don't know, this book was a lot heavier of subject matter than I was anticipating, because both of these 2 characters have parents that are just so casually cruel to them, and just so almost like emotionally abusive in so many different ways. And this book was just a lot harder for me to read than I thought it would be. I don't know, there's also a lot, you know, this girl has a lot of baggage because of this ex-boyfriend that just treated her in such an awful way, and so that was really hard to read as well. But I do appreciate that this book was so much of a slow burn. Like, this book is such a slow burn. Like, it takes so long for anything to happen between these 2, which I actually really enjoyed because it felt more realistic to me in that way. And I feel like for me personally, there felt like there was a lot of unnecessary drama towards the end of this book that I wasn't the biggest fan of, but I also do recognize that I guess it was kind of realistic the way that things unraveled between them. But also, I wasn't the biggest fan of the male narrator on this audiobook. I don't know why the male narrator just kind of drove me fucking crazy, because we do get both of their point of views in this, and the male narrator, for some reason, he was like trying to do a Batman voice or something at times. Like, I don't know, he would like try to make his voice go all deep or something, and it just drove me fucking crazy. I also, like, I know this is like a tiny nitpick thing, but this character, this girl, girl, she uses the word sexily so many times to like describe him, like, oh, he does that so sexily. And I'm like, I don't like hearing the word sexily on an audiobook. Like, there's nothing sexy about hearing the word sexily. Like, I'm sorry. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. There were definitely some things that I enjoyed about this book, but I think I just wanted a little bit more, just a little bit something different from this story. And then I ended up reading Mistakes Were Made by Meryl Wilsner, which this is one of my most anticipated romances of this year, because this is a female-female romance where the protagonist is a college student, right? And she goes to this bar and she doesn't realize it at the time, but she hooks up with her best friend's mom. So there's quite a significant age gap in this book, and to be honest, I wasn't even expecting for some reason the age gap to be as big as it is. Like, there's a 17-year age gap between these two women, which, like, whoa. But you know, I do enjoy a forbidden romance, so I was like on board. I was like, okay, let's give it a shot, let's do it. And this book, I have, again, you know, mixed feelings about this one. This one is also a book that I ended up giving 3 stars because there was some things that I really loved about it, and then there were some things that I thought were a little bit cringy or just kind of disappointing. And I feel like as much as I love a forbidden story, you know, because I really do love a forbidden romance, but there were some aspects of this that made me a little bit uncomfortable with the amount of like sneaking around, just because I felt bad for the daughter. That's like her, you know, it's her daughter and it's her best friend, and like the way they went about some of this was just a little bit like, ooh, it just made me a little bit uncomfortable. But I still feel like the reason why I'm giving this one 3 stars is because they had so much chemistry. Like, I really enjoyed their romance throughout this book. I thought they had a lot of really great chemistry, and I loved what they brought out in each other. You know, I just think that that was like a really beautiful thing to see. But also, I gave this 3 stars and not anything higher because, my god, there was just so many sex scenes. It was like at one point in the book, like nothing was really happening plot wise. It was just constant like sex scene after sex scene after sex scene, and like, oh my gosh, like, I'm not a prude, okay? Like, I don't mind reading about sex scenes in romance books, but also it frustrates me when in romance books like the plot just completely like goes to the side and then all we have are sex scenes. Like, I need more than that, you know, to enjoy a story. So I felt like at some point I was just starting to skim the sex scenes because I was like, okay, when is something gonna happen in this story? Yeah, that was just from my personal taste in romance. I think I would give this one 3 stars. Next thing I read was another mediocre romance for me, which was Do You Take This Man by Denise Williams, and I was kind of bummed that I found this to be just okay because I've been really looking forward to reading something from Denise Williams for a while. This is my first book that I've read from this author. I think the reason why I'm so bummed about this is because it feels like, just based off the premise, it feels like something that I really could have loved because it involves a wedding and they're both going to be trying to, you know, host the events at this wedding because he's an event planner, she's supposed to be leading the ceremony, and so naturally they kind of butt heads, you know, and then we kind of get this enemies with benefits kind of situation happening between these two. And sadly, I just feel very meh about this book. You know, I feel like both of these characters honestly kind of started driving me crazy, like right from the beginning. Like, they were both kind of annoying to me for different reasons. I don't know, the whole like enemies with benefits situation sounds really interesting and like something I would have enjoyed, but I guess I just didn't love the way that it happened in this book. Like, I just didn't really feel a ton of chemistry between these two, and after page 150 or so, I just got really bored with the story and just wanted to like skim to the end. So I don't know, it feels kind of like a 3-star book for me. So after starting off the month with all of that mediocre romance, I finally decided to pick up The Family Game by Catherine Steadman, and this is the first book that I read for the thriller horror reading vlog that I did earlier this month, so I'll have that link down below if you want to hear all of my thoughts. But this book ended up being so surprising. You know, we're following this woman who's a writer in New York City, and she's British, and then she's going to be marrying this American guy, and they get engaged right at the beginning of this book, and she, you know, kind of notices that she hasn't really met his family yet. And so in this book, it's going to be about how he's taking her home to, you know, meet his family, and it all takes place around the holidays. It all takes place around Christmas time, which is something that I was not expecting, and I actually really liked how festive this book was. And this story was so fascinating. I feel like the story is like my kind of perfect mystery because I love that not only does the family have, you know, all of these secrets, and like the family's just very mysterious on their own. Like, they have this family member that they don't really talk about anymore, and there's like all this mystery surrounding them. But there's also a lot of mystery, you know, surrounding our protagonist because she's always hinting at the fact that she might have done something a few years ago that if they knew what she did, she would be put in prison and all this stuff. So it's kind of like there's multiple mysteries happening throughout this book. I feel like if you're going into this book expecting there to be like some kind of huge game element, I feel like you might be a little bit disappointed because there's not that many scenes that involve a game in this book, but there are a few scenes. Like, there's definitely one towards the beginning or middle of it that I really enjoyed, and I thought it was so creepy. And then there is kind of more of a game element involved at the end of this book, but I don't think they're like main staple things throughout the book. But this was just such an entertaining read. I highly recommend the audiobook for this one because the audiobook was so engaging. It had so many cool like sound effects with these tapes that she would listen to and the phone calls. It was just a really engaging audiobook, and it's actually narrated by the author herself, which was really cool. But yeah, this was a 4-star thriller for me. I really enjoyed this one. Then I also read Stay Awake by Megan Golden for that reading vlog, and this is another thriller that I ended up really enjoying this month. In this story, we're following this protagonist named Liv, who she wakes up in the back of a taxi with like no real memory of who she is, kind of, or how she got there. And she goes to her apartment, and then there's other people living in her apartment, and they're like, what are you talking about? Like, you don't live here. And she's kind of like looking for her phone, and she finds this like bloody knife on her person. And then she looks at her wrist, and there's a message that says stay awake that looks like it was like written in her own handwriting. And so she's like, what the heck is going on? I've seen this thriller getting compared to like Memento, you know, the Christopher Nolan movie, because of the way that the protagonist kind of has some issues with memory, and they use, you know, writing on their skin as a way to remind them of things. And I would definitely say that that's pretty accurate for this, because in this story it's really fun because we not only get, you know, Liv's point of view in the present day as she's kind of experiencing these issues with her memory and trying to put together the pieces of what could have happened, but then we also get her perspective from 2 years ago when she was like, you know, working in New York City and she was thriving. And then we also do get the point of view of a detective who's working on this crime scene that looks like it might be associated with Liv and something she could have had something to do with, because the victim's blood is like smeared on the window and it says wake up, which is kind of like weirdly maybe somehow connected to what she wrote on her own wrist. So it's very intriguing. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and the only reason why I didn't give it anything higher is because there were some moments in like the last 100 pages of this book that started to feel a little bit repetitive to me, you know, because we do have our protagonist who every time she sleeps she loses a little bit of her memories, and so it just started to feel repetitive in the way that the same thing would be happening. Like every time she would wake up she'd have to like remember certain things, and I don't know. But otherwise I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was so much fun. I don't think the ending of this book is anything that's like super incredibly shocking, especially if you're the kind of person that reads a ton of thrillers, but I still think it's so fun and so unique and very much worth your time, so I gave this one 4 stars. And then the next book that I read in that video is White Horse by Erica T. Worth, and this one is kind of more of a horror thriller mystery book. And in this story we're following this protagonist named Carrie, and she has this cousin named Debbie who finds this family bracelet, and she gives her the family bracelet, and it turns out that her mom's spirit and this dangerous entity, like this monstrous entity, haunts this bracelet. And so it brings up this whole thing of the past where she's trying to figure out what could have really happened to her mother, because she feels like she doesn't really know the truth of her story. And there's also a lot of creepy scenes with not only her mother kind of like haunting her and being around, but also this creepy monster. Like those were some of my favorite scenes throughout this book because they were legit so freaking creepy and so well done. But I feel like for me this one ended up being more of a 3-star, and the reason why I got a little bit lower of a rating from me is because I just didn't immediately connect with this main character. I just thought like some of her scenes were really repetitive of her like drinking at the bar and smoking cigarettes. Like it was just constantly brought up over and over and over again, and I know that that's like intended probably to, you know, set the atmosphere and the vibe, but it just got to be a little repetitive and annoying for me. I also feel like this book is like a huge nod to like Stephen King and especially The Shining, and like even though I love The Shining and I'm a huge fan of The Shining, it almost was kind of like distracting in a way where I feel like sometimes with books like this, like they rely so much on something else in pop culture that it kind of almost takes away from the story itself, or at least that's how I kind of felt about that. And this one just kind of wrapped up in a way that was like a little bit hard to understand what exactly was happening in the story, or at least for me. And so this one ended up being a 3-star for me. I really do think this book has this really great atmosphere though, and I loved the scenes with like the mom and the monster. I thought those were so creepy. And then I ended up reading Jackal by Erin E. Adams. This was my book troop pick for the month of November. And in this story we're following this protagonist named Liz, who she's going back to her small town where she grew up because her white best friend is getting married. And in this small town where she grew up, all of these young black girls go missing during the summer. Specifically like on a certain day every summer a young black girl in the town will go missing, and the police will just like kind of brush it off and act like it's not a big deal, or like it was an animal attack attack. This time when she's in the town, her best friend is getting married, and her best friend is getting married to this black man, and they have a daughter together, and the daughter goes missing. And so now the town is frantically searching for, you know, her best friend's daughter, and they're trying to figure out how this could all be connected, like what is going on, why are all these young black girls going missing, and why is nobody doing anything about it. And this book is one that I really struggle to rate this book, you know, and I struggle to even like talk about my feelings on it because the first half of this book was so freaking good, you know, and I feel like the first half of this book was probably like 5 stars for me. Like I really enjoyed it. The characters were really interesting to me right away, and I just immediately got sucked into this story. Then the twist and like the end of this book was just one of my least favorite endings. Like it just felt like it came out of nowhere for me, and it really just like threw a curveball at the end that I didn't see coming, but like not in a way that I was wanting or expecting. So this is one that I'm not totally sure how I want to go about rating this book. I feel like I'm still somewhere between a 2 or 3 star. I really do feel like Jackal has such an important message and shines a light on something that's so relevant and so scary, and that's something that I really appreciate about this book and that I think this author did very well. However, I do think the ending just kind of felt a little bit ridiculous for me and just kind of ruined some of what I was really enjoying about this book, and so that's the reason why I feel like I'm still giving this around 2 to 3 stars. But still, I do highly recommend checking out the live show that I did with my friend Bree, because Bree's insight to this book was really informative, and she just brought so much to the conversation, and she really ended up enjoying this book, and so I do recommend watching the live show just so you can get that perspective. Alright, and the next book that I read this month was It Starts With Us by Colleen Hoover, which this is the sequel to It Ends With Us, which is my favorite Colleen Hoover book that I've read so far and probably will always be my all-time favorite. And this story is really incredible because we get Atlas's point of view in this book, which is just totally wild because Atlas was my favorite character in It Ends With Us, and this story pretty much just picks up, you know, right at the end of It Ends With Us, and we pretty much just follow exactly what happened at the ending of that story. And this book was heartbreaking and beautiful in the best way, and like I don't care if it makes me the most basic bitch to say this, but I think this was 5 stars for me. These characters just hold such a special place in my heart, and especially Atlas. Like Atlas is one of the most respectful, amazing humans that I've read in a fictional story. I feel like if I could strive to be a little bit more like Atlas, I could be a little bit of a better person, you know, like he just really inspires me. I feel like he's the kind of character where life will literally throw you the most hardest curveballs and things, and he just makes the best out of a situation, and I just really love that about his character. But God, Atlas and Lily are just like so freaking cute, and I just love this so much. I love the way that there's a character that gets introduced in this book that was kind of like unexpected and just made the story so much better for me. And the way that this story, the whole like concept of It Starts With Us, really connects to the same thing in It Ends With Us. Like I can't even talk about this book without getting too much into spoilers, but if you do want to hear all of my thoughts, again, I did the Patreon exclusive vlog talking all about this book this month, and it includes a lot of like spoilery talk, and I just get all up into my feels, you know, naturally. So I will have that link down below if you do want to watch that. But yeah, this was 5 stars for me. I love this so much. I feel like these characters just mean so much to me. And then the next book that I read this month was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin, and this is a book that is so freaking popular right now. This book actually ended up winning Book of the Year at Book of the Month, and so that's kind of the reason why I ended up bumping it up on my TBR, because I was like, okay, like everyone's been telling me to read this all year long, and so I was like, finally I need to get around to this because it's literally like one of the top best books of the year according to Goodreads and Book of the Month and everything. And so in this story, we're following these characters named Sam and Sadie, and they met when they were teenagers, and then we kind of get to see them throughout their lives. They're always friends, and they're often, you know, in love with each other, but they're never lovers throughout their lives. And in this book, we kind of jump around at different points in their lives, you know, because as I said, they met when they were teenagers, and then they also meet again in college, and they just go through a whole ton of ups and downs in this book. But the main story of this book is how they started and created this amazing video game together that ended up being one of the most successful video games. And this story is one that I have really mixed feelings about. You know, this is one that I personally gave 3 stars to this story, and I feel like there's so much about this book that I really love, and then there's so much of this book that just didn't really work for me. The reason why this book could have been a 5-star for me, like I loved the beginning of this book. I feel like the first 150 pages, I was convinced that this was going to be a 5-star for me. Like I loved the way this was written, I loved the way our characters are introduced, and I loved how real Sadie and Sam both felt. Like they were not perfect characters, and in fact they were kind of very flawed, and almost to the point where it was like a little bit annoying how flawed they were, but it honestly just made them them feel so real to me, and I felt so much for their situations and like what they were going through in life. However, I also feel like this book just gets really boring after like 150 pages. I feel like there's just like a long stretch of the book where I just didn't really care that much about what was happening. There was a lot of video game talk where, you know, I'm not really a video game person, so I honestly couldn't care less about that conversation. And also like the timeline of this book is just a little bit confusing because I feel like most of this is supposed to take place in like the 90s or the early 2000s, but there was not a lot of like things in the writing that made it feel like it was the 90s for me, like if that makes any sense. Like I feel like this could have taken place in the year 2020 and I wouldn't know any different because like there was nothing in the writing to kind of indicate what time period it was supposed to be taking place in. There's also a relationship in this book that Sadie gets involved in. It's like a student-teacher type of relationship, and the way that that was handled throughout this book was just very strange to me. Like it was a very uncomfortable relationship to read about, and I just don't love the way that all of that got resolved. But the ending was really beautiful. The ending really got me, and I can definitely see why people are loving this book as much as they are. You know, like there's a lot of discussion about identity in this book. It's very much like coming of age, growing up. There's a lot of discussion about video games, so if you love video games, I feel like this could be the book for you. But for me, this was a 3-star. I can definitely see why other people are enjoying it. It's just not my particular favorite book, you know? And then the next book that I read was You're Invited. This one is a thriller that I was very excited about because the protagonist, you know, one day she's just like browsing, scrolling through social media, and she ends up seeing her old best friend, like someone that she used to be really close to, but she's not really close to her anymore. And she sees that she's getting married to her ex-boyfriend. And then she gets an email from her best friend that's like, hey, I didn't know if you saw that I'm getting married to him, but we would really love it if you came to the wedding, and like my family would really appreciate it. And so our protagonist ends up going to this wedding, right? Like you're invited, she's going. And then shortly after she gets there, you know, like her friend, the bride, is missing and people think she might have been murdered. And of course, naturally, the biggest suspect is our protagonist because she had the biggest motive to want to do something, you know, because she was very vocal about the fact that she was uncomfortable by the situation and that she didn't really like what was happening. And so naturally, a lot of her family instantly wants to blame this on her. And I really do like the way that this story is told, you know, because it's broken up by, you know, we do get the scenes like leading up to the wedding from the main character's point of view, but we also do get a lot of chapters that are like transcripts from the detectives interviewing the family, and it felt very like Big Little Lies in that way, you know, because it would give you kind of like clues as to like what was gonna happen, but they'd be like, yeah, we never thought that she was capable of this. And this story, I'm not gonna lie, like the first 2/3 of it, I was like, oh, okay, like this is good, but it's like fine. Like it was probably gonna be like a 3-star for me, but then the last third of this book, oh my gosh, I feel like the last third of this book just does something that I was not expecting. Like it kind of has like a moment where things kind of feel different, things kind of change in the plot. It's not like a huge plot twist, but like something happens that's kind of different and you're like, oh, okay, like that's where this is going. And then from that point on, there is just so many little like twists and turns throughout the story, and the author's just constantly tricking you. And I really enjoyed the last third of this. Like I wasn't too sure about this book at first, but by the ending, I was so captivated and so hooked. And so I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Really enjoyed it. And then the last 2 books that I read this month was the nonfiction stuff that I was reading this month, which was, you know, kind of a hot mess. It ended up just being such a hot mess because the first thing that I read was Unlock Your Storybook Heart by Amanda Lovelace. And this is a book that I was excited to read because this is a poetry collection that I saw that it got nominated at the Goodreads Choice Awards, you know, and I've read almost all, I want to say most of the poetry collections that this author has come out with so far, and this one was just not it for me. I ended up giving this one 1 star because I just didn't like it at all. Like I didn't like a single thing about this poetry collection, which is such a shame, you know, because I have enjoyed other poetry collections from this author, and the reason why I keep picking up books from this author is because of how much I enjoyed, you know, the first 1 or 2 books I think that I read. But this was just so, like, I don't know, it was so basic and so like uninspired. Like I tabbed a few of the poems that I just thought were like so simplistic. These honestly read more like Instagram captions to me than any kind of like poetry. And I know that people can say like poetry is so subjective, so you know, like this is definitely maybe gonna work for someone, but like I just there is definitely some really good themes throughout this book of like, you know, feminism and like really beautiful messages about hard things, you know, but at the same time I feel like a lot of these poems were just so basic that I just felt like this was such a waste of my time reading this book. Like for example, there's this one page where the poem is just, her cat is always there for her even when nobody else bothers to be, her soft companion. Like Okay, and then there's this one that says, I don't care if you're 8, 28, or 80. Embrace the unicorn that exists inside of you. It's never too late, so play like you're a child again. A lot of it just felt very like self-help in a way where I'm like, okay, is this advice? So like, I don't care. Then like this one here, hey you, yes you, the very person reading this right now, you deserve a happiness brighter than every firefly in the entire world lit up at the exact same time. Okay? We call this poetry? Like, I don't know. There was just so many moments in this where I was just like, oh my god, cringe, or oh my gosh, like that just sounds like self-help, and like that's not what I was really wanting out of this. So yeah, unfortunately it was 1 star for me because there was not a single poem that I was like, wow, that's stunning, I connect with that in any way. Like there was nothing of that in this. It just feels so lackluster and so uninspired, and that's such a bummer. And then another major bummer, probably the biggest bummer of this month, was that I read Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing by Matthew Perry. And this is a memoir, you know, it's a nonfiction book that I read because I am a huge fan of Friends, you know, as like so many people are. And so this is something that I was really looking forward to because, you know, I had known that Matthew Perry had kind of a rough life, you know, like I knew that he battled a lot of like drug addictions and things like that, but I didn't really know like the full extent of his story. So I was like looking forward to reading this memoir because I not only wanted to, you know, hear more about Friends and like his life and like how that changed his life and, you know, just get to know more about him as an actor, but this memoir was just not really what I was expecting in a not so fun way. I guess I wasn't expecting so much of this memoir to be about his battles with his drug addictions and his struggle with addiction, and it really is, and it was really sad to read. Like this definitely had a lot darker of a tone to it than I was expecting because wow, like he's been through some really, really tough things, and I do appreciate like how vulnerable he was with talking about all the different things that he struggled with. I don't know, like the writing in this book just really made him come off a certain way that I just wasn't expecting because I did not love the way that he would talk about women in this book. Like he would constantly be comparing his own pain to like that of women and being like, you know, yeah, like labor's tough, like, but at least you get a baby out of it. Like with my addiction, like I don't get anything out of it. And just, I don't know, it was kind of strange the way that he would talk about his pain and compare it to others, and he would almost try to make it seem like he's had the hardest life, like nobody else has ever had as hard of a life as he has. He also just came off really like narcissistic at times and just kind of like almost creepy, like the way that he talks about Jennifer Aniston in this book and how he just really like kept asking her out and he was so persistent and she was like no. I don't know, the way he would talk about his ex-girlfriends, it was just very like I just didn't love the way that he talked about women all throughout this book. And then there was also like some really weird comments about Keanu Reeves, you know, where he would say like, I can't believe we lost, you know, these incredible minds like Heath Ledger and River Phoenix, and yet Keanu Reeves still walks among us. And just like weird kind of shit like that where I was like, wait, what the fuck? Like that is so rude and like disrespectful to Keanu Reeves. Like what the fuck did Keanu Reeves ever do to you? And it wasn't just one comment, like there was 2 comments like that about Keanu Reeves, and it's just very weird. I know that since, like I looked it up online and I know that Matthew Perry has since apologized for doing that, but like the fact that it even made it into the book in the first place is just so strange to me. Like no one editing the book thought like, that's kind of weird, like I think you should take that out. My experience with this book was very odd. I want to give this book like around a 2.5 out of 5 stars because it's like, while I do appreciate, you know, his vulnerability with talking about a lot of these things, and while I think it can be maybe helpful for some people to read something like this, and I did like some of the conversations of like the behind the scenes of Friends and kind of getting to learn more about what that was like from his point of view, like that was really interesting, but those moments were so few and far in between. It just kind of like left a bad taste in my mouth, to be honest, and I almost like wish that I didn't read it, you know? I feel like memoirs are so hard to even rate or talk about because it's such a personal thing, right? And it's like, how can I critique this story when it's his life story? But it's not so much that I was like disappointed by what I was reading, it's just the way that he came across really kind of like changed my perspective of him in like not the best way, and that makes me sad. Alright, so those are all of the books that I read in the month of November. As I said, it was a really weird month. It was mostly like a mediocre reading month for me, and I was just really frustrated because I had scrapped 3 different reading vlogs that I had started working on this month, and it was just very frustrating because my head was just not in the best place. I think that after, you know, I end up getting this surgery for my wisdom teeth, I'm gonna be in a lot better of a place, hopefully mentally, where I'm not gonna have this thing just like looming over me. And I just know December is also gonna be a really chaotic content month for me, you know, because December is like all of my end of the year content, and so I tend to be a lot more focused on my content content in the month of December as opposed to reading. And so hopefully I'm still able to read some exciting things. Thank you so much for watching as always. If you've read any of these books, please let me know what are your thoughts on them. What did you read in the month of November? How many books did you read? What was your favorite book that you read this month? Let me know all of the deets in the comments, and thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!